Given an expression with a radical term and a constant in a denominator, we want to be able to rationalize the denominator. Number one, we need to find the conjugate of the denominator. Number two, we need to multiply the numerator and denominator by the conjugate. And number three, we're going to use the distributive property. And then number four, we're then going to simplify. So for example number 9, we're going to rationalize the denominator, which contains two terms. So if you look at the denominator, it has two terms, which is 1 plus the square root of 5. In the numerator, we have 4. So what we have to do is we have to first begin by finding the conjugate of the denominator by writing the denominator and then changing the sign. So the conjugate of 1 plus the square root of 5 is 1 minus the square root of 5. So we're going to multiply the fraction by this fraction, which is 1 minus the square root of 5 over 1 minus the square root of 5. Because again, going back to our example when we rationalize the denominator with one single term, we're multiplying it by a factor of 1. So what this means is now we're going to take 4 times 1 minus the square root of 5 divided by 1 plus the square root of 5 times 1 minus the square root of 5. Now in the numerator, we end up getting 4 times parentheses 1 minus the square root of 5. In the denominator, we're going to get a binomial times a binomial, which is 1 plus the square root of 5 times 1 minus the square root of 5. Now if you notice, I'm not going to distribute the 4 yet. And the reason why is because I can possibly simplify later on. But here in the denominator, we can multiply these two together. And because these signs are opposites, what it's always going to be able to do in this scenario is give you the difference of squares. What does it mean for the difference of squares? Is when you multiply a plus b times a minus b, you then get a squared minus b squared. So if we take a look at this, we have 1 plus the square root of 5 times 1 minus the square root of 5. We know the value of a is 1. We know the value of b is the square root of 5. And then we can use the difference of squares formula. So we have a squared minus b squared. What can we substitute in for a? Well, we said that a is equal to 1, and then we're going to square it. Minus, what do we say b equals? That's the square root of 5, and we're going to square that. Now, 1 squared is going to equal 1. And then the square root of 5 squared is going to equal 5. So we end up getting 1 minus 5, which gives us a number of negative 4. So what happened is that when we multiply these two together, we end up getting a number. We've gotten rid of the radical signs. So now we have 4 times 1 minus the square root of 5 divided by negative 4. And if you notice here, we can actually simplify the 4's. And we end up getting a negative 1. So now we have negative 1 times 1 minus the square root of 5. And what we want to do is now we can distribute the negative 1 to both of those terms. So if we distribute negative 1, we get negative 1 times 1, which is negative 1. Negative 1 times negative square root of 5 is plus the square root of 5. We can write our solution in that form, or we can write the radical first and take the square root of 5 minus 1.